Hi guys, one way to certainly upset journalists is to ask them if they are part of the problem when it comes to the rise of Reform UK. Lewis Goodall, who I generally have a great deal of respect for, along with his co-host, responded to a question posed to him by a listener to his podcast, The Newsagents. The two journalists here tried to dismiss their role in the rise of Reform UK, which is extremely disingenuous. Have a listen to this.
We've got a question here from Christian Alcorn, who says, "Hi guys, how much of an impact on the recent surge in Reform's popularity is down to the excessive media coverage, screen and airtime they get? Any firefighter would tell you that to put out a fire, you starve it of oxygen, yet our media seem incessant on giving them as much coverage as possible. I appreciate that, ironically, this question is giving them further oxygen. Thanks, Christian." And I don't know about you, John, but this is the question, certainly in my social media timeline. This is basically the question that you get all the time, particularly from, listeners, viewers of a particular kind of political bent, which is, why are you, the media, legitimising Reform in the way that you are? You're the one who have created him. The classic thing that people always say is, Nigel Farage has been on Question Time X number of times in the last few decade or whatever it is, and therefore that sort of accounts for his right. Do you get that a lot?
So I don't like the phrase legitimising them, because I think they are legitimate. They're a democratic political party committed to achieving their ends by democratic means. So I don't think they are a kind of quasi-terrorist group that we're sanitising.
We're not talking about the situation now. We're talking about the rise of Farage and Reform. And the listener posed a very valid question. Is the rise in Reform down to the media? Is the media responsible for this? Now, I've mentioned before, it isn't just a problem of providing Nigel Farage with a platform, a disproportionate platform. It's also, as we see on numerous occasions, an unchallenged one. See, one thing is to provide Nigel Farage with a platform, another is to destroy him on that platform. And it seems to be the case it only happens with foreign media. British journalists are afraid, with the odd exception, are afraid to challenge Nigel Farage, afraid to hold his feet to the fire. And why is that? Because they know that he will not come back on their show again. Farage is afraid of scrutiny. Journalists want clicks and likes, so they welcome Farage onto the show, they tickle his belly, and they know that he'll be back again. He'll say something controversial, and he'll be back on their show, sometime in the future. That's not how you scrutinize him. That's not how you deal with people like Nigel Farage. You're supposed to challenge them. So first of all, you have the problem that he was given a huge platform, disproportionate platform. And second, he was unchallenged.
You might not like their politics. I think where there is a point on this is that Reform and Farage are indistinguishable. And you and I we sat in this studio, I think exactly 2 weeks ago after the local council elections, and talked about whether there would be more scrutiny now and more accountability for Reform now that they've got all these councils and mayoralties and the like. I think that if you are one of the big TV networks, kind of BBC or ITV or Sky, I'd be saying, no, we don't want Nigel Farage. We want other members of Reform, because I think
look, it's not going to work. You honestly think that they're interviewing Farage in order to challenge him? See, this would be true if the journalists were actually doing their job. They would say, let's bring on other members of Reform UK and grill them. And it has happened on the odd occasion. Richard Tice, Lee Anderson hardly ever, their newest MP, because they attract attention. That's why they're invited on. Farage is the gold standard for the media. We want to have him on as much as possible. But we can't always get him, so we go with the next level. The next level being Richard Tice, and then a level lower than that is one of their other MPs. But the goal is not to challenge them. The goal is to give them a platform, to attract attention.
We know that Farage is a brilliant media performer, but if it is a party that has a bench of other people as well, then I think that they ought to be tested as well. Because they
ought to be, but that's not the goal of the media. The goal of the media is not to challenge Reform UK. It's to give them a platform and to milk the attention that they attract. That's what it's about. Has this guy just woken up from a coma or something? Look at what's happened with Farage over the last number of decades. Not even the last number of years, the last number of decades. He's used the media to his advantage. And now you're saying, now it's time to challenge these people. It's a bit late for that.
I think that you will see people who aren't as good as Farage and aren't as convincing as Farage, and then you will get the scrutiny to see whether this really adds up as a proper political party.
Yeah, I am highly suspicious of the idea that the media can be solely held accountable to blame for the rise of Farage or indeed any populist force.
It's not solely the media, but the media has a huge role to play. See, the media's job is to challenge people, to hold politicians to account. Now, if you don't do that, then what's the point of the media? Because if you don't do that, what you're doing is you're allowing Farage and others to lie to the public. Farage was on Question Time. He was on other programs within the BBC. He was on ITV. He was on LBC. He had his own show on LBC. He took calls from the public. He was able to use that to convince people, look, we need to leave the European Union. The problem is the European Union. The problem is membership of the European Union. So whatever the issue that was brought up, Farage used his platform, either as a guest or as a host, to sell his snake oil. And where were the journalists who were pushing back? Where was the scrutiny? If there was no scrutiny, then the public believe it to be true. So why did so many people vote against their own interests? Why did so many people vote for Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson? Because the media did not do its job. I keep saying it's not just about providing Farage and others oxygen, it's also pushing back on that.
I think that's a cop-out. I think it's an easy thing to cling to for liberals and for liberalism to think that if only were it not for the media, that this guy wouldn't exist or that these political ideas would not exist. There is probably an element.
They don't get it. It's like, it's not our fault. It's not our fault that Nigel Farage was given a huge platform. It's not our fault that when he was on TV almost every frigging night, it seemed, that nobody challenged him or the challenge was extremely weak. It's not our fault that we didn't hold him to account. It's not our fault that the public believed his lies. It's not our fault that the public voted for him and people like Boris Johnson. Why do these people become journalists? Honestly, that's an honest question. Is it because it pays the bills? Or do they actually believe in something? Because what's happened over the last number of decades, it seems to me, and you can tell me if you have a different opinion in the comments, but it seems to me that journalism is just chasing likes and clicks. And who's great at attracting attention? Nigel Farage and Reform UK, because they say controversial things. But it gets worse. Of
truth, that there have been times. I mean, look, Farage has definitely got a very supportive media. That is true of all right-wing sort of populist type forces. It's always true that certainly the press, at least, is highly sympathetic, potentially, to a force like that, and has long been. And the press, we know, is very...
Okay, why is that the case? You're just saying it as if it's taken. You know, we just have to go along with that. Why is the media sympathetic to Farage? Like, you started off by saying, it's not our fault, don't blame us. And now you're saying, well, the media is sympathetic to Nigel Farage.
Very powerful in determining what the kind of national agenda is, what the BBC does, what the broadcasters do, and so on. So that is certainly true, and that's been true of all sorts of different political figures on the right. But, like, when people say things like, Nigel Farage is on Question Time again, I'm sorry, like, is that true of Donald Trump? Is that true of Marine Le Pen? Is that true of the suite of populist forces, sometimes occasionally on the left, but certainly on the right, that we have seen throughout the West over the last decade? Georgia Malone, you could just go on and on and on. And I think the problem is far more fundamental, which is that liberalism, progressivism, the anti-nativist, populist conservative, whatever you want to call it, side of politics has not got its act together.
And look,
So the problem is not Nigel Farage pumping out racist rhetoric and xenophobic rhetoric. It's not the problem is not the media not holding him to account. No, the problem is the people on the other side. It's their fault.
look, the grievances exist. The grievances
Yeah, exactly.
about illegal immigration, say, small boats arriving, exist independently of Farage. They may...
This is where the whole thing collapsed. You're trying to suggest that when Nigel Farage talks about immigration is out of control, that's true, or that's a legitimate grievance. Your job is to correct that. Your job as a journalist is to point out how it's not a legitimate grievance. Think about it, back in 2010, immigration was 7, 8 down the list of priorities. The European Union, concerns about the European Union were way down the list of priorities of the British public. But between 2010 and 2015, immigration went to the top. Now, how is that possible? Did people suddenly become concerned about immigration in the space of 5 years? And forget about the NHS, forget about schools, forget about all the other issues? How do you think the public were convinced that immigration was a massive problem? It was the core problem. It was the fundamental problem in society. How is it possible? Well, it seems to be happening at the same time as Nigel Farage was on LBC. Nigel Farage was on Question Time. Nigel Farage was on TV all the frigging time. So there's a strange correlation between Nigel Farage being on TV all the time unchallenged, and then suddenly a surge in anti-immigration rhetoric and anti-immigration sentiment. But nothing to do with the media. Leave the media alone. They're just trying to do their job. This is pathetic. These people are part of the problem. I'm not saying these individual journalists, I'm talking about journalism in general. They created a massive platform for Nigel Farage, and they allowed him to pontificate unchallenged, or pretty much unchallenged. And then people got into their minds, well, the problems is the European Union. The greatest threat to our society is the European Union and immigration. No, you can't wash your hands of the situation. The rise of reform is part due to the media. I'm not saying it's all down to the media, but governments not doing their jobs, this is also another reason. But the media had a huge, and still has a huge role to play in the rise of Farage and reform. And nothing is going to change if people don't actually admit that they're on the wrong side here. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.